Both Michigan Big Ten teams won on Sunday, but Andy Patton, only one of them still undefeated in the conference.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. This is my good friend Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you so much for making us your first listen or watch to kick off a brand new week. And we do want to remind you, you can catch every one of these episodes ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all you everydayers joining us, and of course, our great Locked On College Basketball Discord members. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. Check it all out at FanDuel.com. Andy, ain't much going on tonight in college basketball. In fact, there's just two games in the Power 5 conferences. Why? Because it's National Championship Monday. Here at the Shade House, we're cheering for Notre Dame because Ohio State knocked off my wife's Texas Longhorns, so that's where we're going for. Andy, who are you cheering for?
Also cheering for Notre Dame. I got a lot of family friends who went to Oregon, so they are not going to be rooting for Ohio State, so out of solidarity, neither will I.
Yes, take that. Okay, good. Well, folks, hopefully you had the opportunity to check out Locked On College Basketball Saturday Game Night last night. Leaf Tulane and Andy joined him last night. It was the third week of it, man. That show is off and running. It's a blast. A great way to just hop in live on YouTube and recap what happens on Saturday night. If you missed it, you can go back and watch it on YouTube. And of course, we dropped it into the audio feed for you so that you don't miss a second. So the majority of those games that we talked about, we're not going to recover today. So like Kentucky and Alabama, Auburn and Georgia, et cetera, because we want to get to as much as we can of the weekend. That said, I'm going to stop talking and tell you about what we will be talking about today. We had several surprise losses over the weekend, Andy. 5 home teams that were favored by at least 7.5. And they were shocking to us, including, unfortunately, the teams that you and I cover.
Yeah.
And things are off to a rough start for Coach Cal in Fayetteville. That might be putting it nicely. We'll have that along with the rest of the Monday six-pack. But, Andy, where we want to go first is both Michigan teams in the Big Ten were in action on Sunday. And I'll tell you what, both had close, tight games, but both ended up pulling out victories. The earlier of the two games, which was the highlight of the two, it was our 5th ranked game of the weekend. Michigan State holds on against Illinois 80-78. And then just a little bit after that, Michigan held on in overtime against Northwestern 80-76, thanks to another 30-piece from Big Vlad, my guy. Let's start, though, in East Lansing, Michigan. Andy, what did you take away from this game?
Yeah, first of all, I love the fact that not only did these two Michigan schools both win on the same day, shortly one after another, but their scores were almost identical. Very much wish that Northwestern had hit one more shot so they would both have 80-78 scores.
Of course, one of them needed 5 extra minutes to get there, but
yeah, no, they did need 5 extra minutes to get there. And I think certainly if you want to continue the comparison between the two schools, I think it's reasonable for Spartans fans to acknowledge that, or for Wolverines fans to acknowledge that Illinois is a better opponent than Northwestern, but still a win is a win for both these teams. They continue to be two of the best teams in the Big Ten. Looking at Tom Izzo and Michigan State, a lot of intrigue in this game. One of the things that we've seen from Tom Izzo's team throughout the year and really throughout many of the last years over the last 2 decades plus is the balanced scoring from this team. You had Trey Holloman had 17, but pretty much everybody else in the rotation was between like 8 to 11 points. They had 2 guys off the bench with 11, 2 guys with 8, 1 with 9 in the starting lineup. Just a ton of balance. You never really know who's going to beat you, who's going to play well down the stretch. Frankie Fiddler had some good moments down the stretch in this game. Like we said, Holloman led the team, in the first part of the game, really. It was a nice performance from this team against an Illinois team that probably has a better chance if arguably their best player, Kasparis Jakusionis, is able to play more than 9 minutes, but he had significant foul issues. He had his 4th foul early in the second half, comes back in the game, immediately gets a bucket, cuts the score to 2, but then fouls out right after that. It was so frustrating to watch. I'm sure I'm friends with many people who are NBA draft people, and I'm sure they were very frustrated to not get to see what Jack Casillas would have done later in that game as one of the kind of premier college basketball prospects. But getting in foul trouble is a huge part of the story for him in this game in particular, because without him down the stretch, this Illinois team had to rely more on Boswell, who made some nice plays, but just is not the same level of playmaker as Jack Casillas. And in critical moments, he had a turnover down the stretch, and that was kind of it. That really ended up doing it for Michigan State. For Illinois against Michigan State. This Spartans team has been an absolute wrecking ball in conference.
Lost since Maui.
Yeah, they haven't lost since Maui, exactly. And I talked about it a little bit recently, I think, in a preview episode, because they haven't played any of the better teams in the Big Ten. And this was kind of a big test for them of like, okay, now, yes, they're at home, and yes, they are still the higher ranked team, but like this is your first chance against like one of the 5 or 6, 8 best teams in the Big Ten, and they passed the test. And we'll continue to see, they got plenty of games left. They got plenty, got games against some of the better teams that we haven't seen them face yet. But this was the first real test for them in conference play. And check for Tom Izzo's club.
Yeah, and Andy, another area of comparison is they're like almost right next to each other at KenPom. Michigan is 11, Michigan State 13. It's crazy stuff there, and so that's really kind of crazy to see. Yeah, and thanks to UConn losing, Michigan State now has the second longest winning streak in the entire nation. Pretty crazy stuff, dude. I really thought you mentioned Yakachonis coming back in the second half. Having that and one, then getting another bucket. And I was like, oh, is this about to be one of those epic moments where it's like homie's got 4 fouls and just like rides it down the stretch? And unfortunately, it was like literally as I'm thinking that, he runs up on the back of, I can't remember who it was, but a brilliant, whatever Michigan State player had the ball. I wish I had remembered it. Just it was one of those slow plays, and Yakachonis just kind of falls all over him, and that's it, and that's all, right? But credit to Will Riley, who also had 4 fouls and did a great job staying in. He didn't end up fouling out and ends up being the leading scorer for Illinois, right? Like of the 3 first-year college players, he's the one that's dropped off a little bit, now coming off the bench, while Ivicic and Yakachonis are the ones kind of getting more headlines than Riley. And so I thought a really good performance by the other freshmen in this hostile environment in East Lansing. And so really encouraging stuff there, Andy. But ultimately, look, Sparty pulls it out. Illinois doesn't. And by doing so, they're the only undefeated team now in the Big Ten. It's crazy, crazy stuff.
I got to tell you, too, they're favored in their next 6 games in conference play, according to KenPom. And
Michigan State is, or Illinois?
Michigan State favored their next 6 games in conference play. And they actually, as I was saying, the favorable schedule is going to run out. They got some time. They got Rutgers next. That's a road game, but it's a team that they should beat. They got Minnesota at home. They got
Michigan would like to tell you to watch out for
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Not saying it's a guarantee by any stretch. They got USC away after that. Then they got UCLA away. Those are 3 days apart, though, so it's not back-to-back road trips. And then they got Oregon at home, and that's obviously going to be a tough game. Oregon, a very good team, but they're playing them in East Lansing. Then they got Indiana at home. Those are the ones they're favored. Their next game where they're not favored is against Illinois again, but this time, of course, on the road. Then they got Purdue. Then they got Michigan. Then they got Maryland. Then they got Wisconsin. Then they got Iowa and Michigan. Man, that's a brutal end of the season for Michigan State, but they're going to continue to – it looks like they may continue to roll for a while before then.
Well, and so what that means, though, Andy, is if you are a Michigan State fan, you got to take care of business over this next stretch, right? Like you can't drop any of these games that you're expected to win because you want to give yourself the margin as the schedule gets even tougher. Now, they've already given themselves the margin by only losing those 2 non-con games, which were, by the way, to Kansas and Memphis, very understandable games, and then doing what they've done so far through Big Ten play. And that's really good. Andy, let's go to Ann Arbor. I know we don't have much time here before we need to move on, but as we look at this game, I guess maybe the biggest thing for me that was kind of crazy is it was the second straight overtime game for both teams. Obviously, as I just joked about, Michigan losing thanks to, I don't know what's going on Dawson Garcia's head with that like cheetah print highlight thing, but whatever, if it's going to work to hit half-court buzzer beaters. I guess I should do the same to my hair. So it's great for Michigan to bounce back from that. But, man, needing overtime against Northwestern at home. Michigan almost found themselves in segment 2 today, Andy, if I can foreshadow a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, they did. And that would have been for a roster with a lot of new faces, obviously a new coach in a new conference, losing a heartbreaking game like they did to Minnesota, to be able to bounce back is a sign of good coaching. It's a sign of a roster that has that continuity. And yes, or has more continuity, more kind of, just a lot of that kind of juice that you need to be able to win this kind of game. Because Northwestern, they're not the best team in the Big Ten. They're not a top half team, I don't think, in the Big Ten at this point. But
Boo Booey's not walking through that door.
Right, yeah, they don't got Boo Booey anymore. But this is a decent team, and it's a well-coached team. Chris Collins is one of the better coaches, and I think this is the kind of game that a lot of teams lose because they had that emotional loss prior to that. And it's also a game where you're arguably your best player. I think Vlad Goldin's probably the best player, but Danny Wolf certainly in that conversation. Folks, he had 4 points. He didn't make a field goal in this game. He was 0 for 7, 0 for 2 from 3. He was 4 of 8 from the free throw line. That's bad. Like, this was a player who has been consistently very good for this team. He still had 13 rebounds in this game, but he had 2 assists, which, as somebody who's been distributing the ball a lot better than that typically, this was a pretty off night for him. And to have that kind of combined with the, a potential hangover from the loss to Minnesota and everything else that comes with that, to still find a way to win this game, to have 3 other starters in double figures along with Vlad Goldin's 31 points. Dusty May's a phenomenal coach, and you could tell that they needed him to find a way to help get this team a W, especially going into overtime. They got it done. Huge shout out to Vlad Goldin. Huge shout out to this team for picking up a W here. And it's fun that the Big Ten, with so much conversation, is UCLA going to be the leader? Is Oregon going to come in? Is Purdue going to be back? Is Indiana have it? Like, at the end of the day, the Big Ten still runs through the 2 schools in Michigan, and that's kind of a fun thing for us to see this year after the Juwan Howard era and after some not so great Izzo years. It's nice to see these 2 schools back in action.
With Purdue kind of putting their stamp on this thing right now too, folks. They're kind of sliding under the radar, man, but going out to win at Oregon, that's big time. Yeah. And so the top of the Big Ten is going to be really, really interesting to see what happens there. A lot of fun stuff, Andy, and we'll keep tabs on it going forward.
Well, as you mentioned, Isaac, we teased it a little bit. 5 teams lost at home over the weekend. All of them were at least favored by 7.5 points. 4 of them were ranked, including Scott Drew's Baylor Bears lost to TCU on Sunday. We're going to talk about that game and the other surprising results around college hoops coming up in just a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. And now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. We mentioned it's college football championship night tonight. Ohio State quarterback Will Howard, he's got a promo at Prize Picks where his over for passing yards is literally set at half a yard. We may be rooting for Notre Dame, but folks, Will Howard's going to throw for more than 1 yard in this game. They also have Quishon Judkins 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns. So if he scores 1 touchdown and Will Howard throws for more than 1 yard, that's literally all you need to happen. You win money on that bet. So it's fun to predict. It's super easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks' flex play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Are you ready to run your game this college football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, folks, segment 2 still here. Andy Patton, Isaac Schade, talking all things college hoops here as we look at an exciting weekend. We talked a lot about the Saturday games on the Game Night episode again with myself and Leaf Tulane. If you haven't checked it out, it's in your feed. It's a fantastic show recapping all the Saturday night action. But the nice thing about this show is we had plenty of good stuff on Sunday to get through as well. We talked about the 2 Michigan teams already. Now I want to talk about another ranked team, or a ranked team that went down, one of many that happened over this weekend. Baylor, who were just hanging on to a top 25 spot at number 25. They get upset at home by TCU, 74-71, the final score. Scott Drew and the Bears down to 3-3 in conference play. Was kind of a rough start. I mean, they got off to a very rough start this season, getting smacked by Gonzaga. We'll talk about them in a second, by 38 points. In the first game of the season, we saw Baylor kind of have some ups and downs throughout the year, but one of the main issues they've had all year long, Isaac, they're not a great rebounding team. And for a team that acquired Norchad Omier this offseason, a player who averaged a double-double for 4 straight years, you'd think that the rebounding wouldn't be an issue, but he only had 5 in this game. But even when he has good rebounding games, it just feels like there's not enough rebounding on this team. They get out-rebounded 41-25 by TCU, who had 12 offensive rebounds in this game. Again, Omier, 20 points, 5 boards for Baylor, but didn't have enough help from the supporting cast. And now Scott Drew's team going to be out of the top 25 yet again, and a team that is right now barely even 500 in the Big 12, despite having super high expectations coming into the year.
And if I'm being honest, I think even if they win this game, they're out of the top 25 after losing to Arizona earlier in the week. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but yeah, I mean, you talk about Omier. It's nice he had those 20 points, was kind of a beast at the free throw line. But the other issue, as I was watching things on Sunday and then looking back at the box score from it, is your other big time transfer, Jeremy Roach, and your stud freshman, VJ Edgecombe. The two of them combined to go 10 of 31 from the field and 4 of 12 from 3. And that's not going to cut it either. So it's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's really the more unheralded freshman who has become more heralded, in some ways, Rob Wright, who, was out here distributing 8 assists, just 1 turnover. He's doing it right. And just, I don't want to sit here and say, man, I wonder if Scott Drew's wondering if he wishes he was in Lexington instead of Waco after all. But I think some of it is just the Big 12 is really stinking hard, man. And unfortunately they catch Arizona right as they're rounding into form. And then that other loss is at Iowa State. And so it's like the Iowa State loss is understandable. The Arizona loss is understandable, especially because that's on the road. And this, though, is where you run into the problem. You can't then compound that by losing at home to TCU. And so it was Sunday's loss at home to the Horned Frogs. That's the real killer right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's a conference where you just don't have room to take any extra losses. You have to win every game you're expected to win. TCU at home is a game you're expected to win. Even if it's a rivalry, even if TCU is not a bad team, it's a game you got to win. Big shout out to Ernest Uday, by the way, 16 points, 15 boards, and 4 blocks for the Horned Frogs in this game. He was 5 of 9 from the field, 6 of 8 from the free throw line. But Isaac, one of the things we wanted to talk about with this game was that Baylor is one of 5 teams that lost at home over the weekend. 4 of them were ranked. All of them were favored by 7.5 or more points. It was a really disastrous weekend for a lot of these teams that have kind of been, some of them have been hanging on to top 25 spots. Some of them have been teams that have been disappointing overall this season. And to kind of see all these teams kind of come together and lose at the same time, I mean, I think it really highlights the parity in college basketball that we've seen this year, and the kind of unpredictability with some of these teams being billed as top 5 teams starting the year. I'm going to read off the 5 teams, their losses, and then kind of let you take it wherever you want to take it with this group of team. Obviously, one of them is Baylor, losing to TCU. We already talked about that. They were 12.5 point favorites at FanDuel coming into that game. We talked about Gonzaga already, the 16th ranked Zags. They lost at home to Santa Clara, second straight loss for the Zags after losing on the road to Oregon State. They lost 103-99. First time the Zags have given up 100 points at the Kennel ever in 20 plus years of playing there. The Zags were 14.5 point favorites coming into that game. North Carolina, the only unranked team out of this group, and they're not getting any closer to getting back in the top 25 after losing at home to Stanford. 72-71 was the final there. The Tar Heels were favored by 12.5 coming into that game. Maxime Renaud continued to do what he does, and it killed it for the Cardinal. And then 2 more losses, both from the Big East. Marquette, 7th-ranked Golden Eagles, lose at home to Xavier, 59-57. Very close game. Marquette was favored by 9.5. And then UConn taking another conference loss, 14th-ranked Huskies at home to Creighton. They're really feeling the absence of Liam McNeely, you can tell. 68-63 to a good Creighton team, but an unranked Creighton team. UConn was favored by 7.5 before losing that one. Isaac, lots of games, lots of wild results here. What are your initial thoughts?
Man, there's a lot, Andy. You've got teams doing different things, like for Marquette, right? Like, I think they have probably overachieved based on what we thought they would do. But the thing is, the rest of the Big East was either underachieving or maybe some over, like St. John's is probably better off than we thought they would be. But Marquette had a chance to stay one game ahead of all that. So they were bound to take a loss at some point. You just figure it would be to UConn or Creighton or St. John's. And it's kind of like what we just said about Baylor. Like, you don't want to do that against Xavier, who was, 3-4 in Big East play coming into this thing. And so that's a tough loss for the Shaka Smarts to stomach, I guess. You talk about North Carolina. They had been finding some momentum. They had a 4-game winning streak, and you're hosting Stanford. And it's the same kind of thing of like, hey, eventually you're going to get to Pitt and Clemson and Duke coming up here in a couple weeks. And North Carolina, it's kind of interesting because they've survived a couple of these moments. This was the 4th game where they have had to defend a end of game shot that would decide the game one way or the other. They have successfully defended the first 3. So you play with fire, you're going to get burned eventually, right? And that's what happened in this game. And you just can't put yourself in that position if you're trying to dig out of where you've been in non-con play. And then, UConn has been, other than one other game, undefeated since returning from Maui, where things went really bad. And now you pile another one on top of it. And it's just like, now, to be fair, I thought there was a play. They were down 3 late, and Creighton was fouling up 3. And I thought we had a shooting motion situation, Andy. That doesn't happen very often, that I thought should have been called. They didn't. And that would have changed the whole tenor of the end of that game. But man, it was a rough weekend for these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And with UConn, I mean, they've lost 2 out of 3. The other one was a road loss to Villanova, and losing on the road is different, but Villanova's been a pretty inconsistent team. That's still not a good loss for them. We mentioned McNeely being out, and it's a team that has depth, they have talent, and they kind of have always had this next man up mentality, and it just they haven't been able to get it done without him. And their win was Georgetown, and that was a road win over a Georgetown team that's not bad. That's certainly improving under Ed Cooley. It was an 8-point win. It wasn't super comfortable, but they got the W, had an entire week off, and then at home lose to Creighton. Again, a Creighton team that doesn't have Pop Isaacs, that hasn't been very consistent this year. They're a talented team and coached by one of the very best in Greg McDermott, and obviously have Stephen Ashworth and Ryan Kalkbrenner, our guys have been around. I think Jamiya Neal just went crazy.
He went off
in
24
that game
in this
too.
game for Jamiya Neal. Yeah.
That's wild to have that happen for UConn. That's a rough loss. It's not a catastrophic loss by any stretch, but it's not a good loss. And we talked about Gonzaga already. They gave up 97 points to Oregon State. They gave up 103 points to Santa Clara, 200 points in their last 2 games. I said this on Locked On Zags. The fact that they had a chance to win both these games when they gave up 200 points is honestly a testament to how great of an offensive team they are. But this defense is predictable. It is easy for opponents to figure out how to beat them. Santa Clara, 18 made threes in this game. Isaac, they made their first 7 3-pointers in the second half. Tyree Bryan had 35. He had his career high as a junior, career high with like 6 minutes to go in the first half. It was an absolutely nuclear performance from him. And then when he finally slowed down, Adama Alpha-Ball woke up, and that was curtains for the Zags in that one. Some of the very best teams in the sport, some teams that have been in, UConn, Baylor, Gonzaga, North Carolina have all been in national championships in the last half decade. And yet all 5 of these teams lose at home over the weekend. Like we said, parity in college basketball seems to be at an all-time high. What a great example of it right here.
Yeah, because we put that in, obviously there were some ranked teams that lost, but to other ranked teams.
Right.
But then, as you and Leaf talked about, we had Iowa State going on the road and losing. We had Tennessee going on the road and losing to Vandy. Tough in-state game. And Arizona, I would almost put in a similar category to North Carolina, other than this was on the road. But both teams had kind of struggled and were really starting to turn a corner. And now both take these losses. The Caleb Love, RJ Davis parallel continues to happen, Andy. It's almost wild how the stars align it all. Andy, we got to get to our 6-pack. John Calipari is winless, y'all, in the SEC after losing to Mizzou. The Tigers are now 4-1 in the SEC, just like we all expected both of these teams to be. That and more coming up in our weekly 6-pack in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers, you can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app, man, it's really easy to navigate. They got a whole variety of bets to keep every game exciting. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for those winnings to drop in. So whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some excitement to the playoffs or tonight's national championship game, FanDuel got you covered. Speaking of, Ohio State favored by 8.5 over Notre Dame. I'm surprised the line's that big. So maybe you are too, and you want to make something do about that. But also, there's all sorts of fun team specials. You can take odds on Notre Dame to not score a touchdown, odds on Ohio State to not score a touchdown. That would be silly, but you can do it. You can take odds on one or more passing touchdowns in every quarter. So many other fun things. Go check it all out at FanDuel.com with your chance to win $300 in bonus bets. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Andy, we come to our Monday six-pack and what's become one of our favorite individual moments of every week here on the show, where whoever's setting up the segment gets to decide if they're taking game one or if they're passing game one, and the listener has no idea. We never reveal it to each other. And Andy Patton, I want you to go first.
All right. Happily. I love talking about John Calipari. Arkansas 0-5 in conference play. They lose at Mizzou over the weekend, 83-65, 83-65. This is a game that Ken Pom had them favored. Ken Pom does not have Arkansas favored in very many games remaining this season, probably even less now that one of the few games where his algorithm liked the team to win, they go out and lose by 18. And the Hogs, it's not getting any easier. Nobody's getting an easier schedule in the SEC. They got Georgia on Wednesday. They got Oklahoma on Saturday. They're at Kentucky on February 1st. That is the game that everybody should have circled on their calendar if they don't yet. Where is this team going to get any wins? I mean, it's a legitimate concern for this club. I saw a stat that I believe there are 16 new coaches at the Power 5 level, so coaches who are at new schools, and every single coach has at least won one conference game except for John Calipari at Arkansas. That is shocking. Obviously, the SEC is a fantastic league, better than the rest, but still to not have a single win, to not have a win over a team that did not win a single game in the SEC last year in Mizzou is shocking. But again, shouts to Mizzou, 4-1 in conference play. So happy for Dennis Gates after such a disastrous. He had a great first year, abysmal second year. So much of the conversation coming into this season was, which one is it? Which, is, if he looks like he did last year, does he even stick around does he make it to year 4? If he looks like he did in the first year, was the second year an aberration? So far, so good in one of the toughest conferences we've ever seen for Mizzou to be 4-1. Big shout to them. Things not looking so good in Fayetteville.
It'd be funny to look at the records of each coach in that coaching carousel that SMU set off. Man,
I have a feeling Kentucky's quite happy with where they're at, because I don't think Musselman, not going so great at USC, but things going pretty well.
They beat Illinois in Champaign.
Illinois. And then got waxed by Wisconsin.
Yeah, they did. All right, Andy, speaking of SMU, let's stay in that classic ACC where Clemson goes to win at Pitt 78-75 in overtime. This is a game where we're looking at two teams that were really playing for the top of this league. One's doing it, the other not so much. Clemson. Yeah. Andy led by 14 early in the second half of this game. They let it slip away. They only scored 26 in the second half, but ended up pulling it out in overtime. And ultimately, you get the win on the road, you'll take it, and it doesn't matter how. The chef out here doing chef stuff, Andy. 15 points, 11 boards on a very efficient 5 of 8 from the field. But Chase Hunter continues to be a dude. 20 more points for him. 6 of 11 from the field. 5 threes for him. Man, crazy stuff. Clemson, 7-1 in ACC play. They are joined there by the suddenly red-hot Louisville, along with Wake. Those are the only 3 one-loss teams, all trying to keep pace with Duke, who, of course, is still undefeated. Pitt, on the other hand, Andy, they were 3-0 at one point in the ACC. Now they've lost 4 in a row, and they're sitting here 3-4. Got to get things figured out. Maybe if Coach Capel wasn't trying to fight people after games, that would help.
I mean, there's an inflection point on Pitt's season, and it's quite literally when Cooper Flagg dunked all over Diaz Graham in that game against Pitt.
It broke them.
They scored like 20-something points in the rest of that game, and then it's just been curtains for them since then. It's wild how accurate that specific timeline seems to have broken off for the Panthers. You mentioned SMU briefly, 117 points against Miami. I don't have anything else to add to that other than the fact that SMU scored 117 points in an AAC game.
Miami is terrible.
is very, very bad. Back to the Big 12, Kansas held off Kansas State 84-74. Jayhawks now 13-4 overall, 4-2 in the Big 12. Meanwhile, Kansas State falls to 1-5 in conference play, 7-10 overall. And Kansas was up 2 touchdowns to start this game, 14-0. We're pitching a shutout. Man, that's 3 different sports we got all in one reference there. They had a 10-point lead at halftime, played them even for the rest of the game. Hunter Dickinson bounced back after some struggles earlier in the week. 25 points for him, 8 boards, 3 assists, and a block. Zeke Mayo, 24 and 5. Kansas State, 23% from 3. Coleman Hawkins, 15 points, 10 assists, 7 boards, but he was 1 of 7 from 3. Not getting it done when they can't shoot the rock. Rough season continues for Jerome Tang. Meanwhile, Bill Self and the Jayhawks back in action after a nice win here.
Andy, let's stay in the Big 12 where we get 2 Utah teams together, both part of the Big 12. BYU goes on the road and loses at Utah 73-72. BYU gets a little tip in from Traore there just before the regulation buzzer to send this game to overtime, and then they can't do it there. And Utah scores, gets a couple free throws with, what was it, like 13 seconds left to kind of go back up by 1, and then nothing the rest of the way. Andy, kind of crazy stuff there because speaking of teams that aren't good, Utah is one of those for the Utes, though they are 3-3 in conference play, and they're actually have a better record than BYU in the Big 12. I don't think I would have guessed that before I looked at the schedule or the standings for this one. So fun to see this rivalry get played twice a year. Ezra Assar, 26-6 on 11 of 15 shooting for the Utes. That's going to do it, especially when BYU's going 8 of 30 from 3, Andy. If you're going to take 30, you probably need to make like 10 of them to win there, and crazy stuff. Always fun to watch Jaeger Dimon, but man, they can't pull it out at Utah. Massive win for the Utes, somewhere Rick Majerus is smiling.
Going over to the Big Ten and going all the way back to Friday. Didn't get this one on the game night show, so I want to talk about it here. Indiana picks up a nice win in overtime against Ohio State, 77-76. The Hoosiers end their 2-game losing streak, move up to 5-3 in conference play. Luke Goody, what a game from him, 23 points. He had a 3 with about a minute to go in overtime. I think there was only, I think it was 6-5 was the scoring in overtime in this game. Basically, neither team scored at all. Goody hit that clutch 3. That gives the W to Mike Woodson and the Hoosiers. Umar Ballo was the star, though, outside of Goody. He had 21 and 15, including 8 offensive boards. Meanwhile, Ohio State drops to 2-5 in conference play. There was some excitement, some intrigue with Jake Diebler taking over that program with a high-profile transfer class with Aaron Bradshaw and Sean Stewart coming in. Micah Parrish, he had a great game. He had 19 points. John Mobley had 22. Bruce Thornton had 18, but the bench only had 8 points. The other 2 starters, 9 combined, just not enough depth for this Ohio State team. They take another loss. Indiana, though, nice to get them back in the win column after what was a really rough week prior to that.
Yeah, Andy, I want to finish off today with a storyline that I have been tracking for a while now. The DePaul Blue Demons had lost 39 straight Big East regular season games. They were in action Friday night, January 17th. I bring that up because it was the Saturday was 2 years to the day since they had last won a regular season Big East game. They're at Georgetown. They've had all these close shaves. They're on the brink of going to 40 straight games that they've lost in the Big East, and they go out and do it. It got really close in the second half, but they pull it out 73-68. I really thought they were going to beat Marquette earlier in the week to break the streak, but really, really good to see. DePaul was up like 11 at the half, had to kind of hold on, but CJ Gunn helps out with 17 points. And going 7-15 from 3 is always a good thing, Andy. Crazy. Love to see it for this team, for Chris Holtman getting that first dub. You could tell how excited those guys were. And their reward is now they get to host Creighton on Tuesday. So we'll see how that goes.
Not a lot of easy days in the Big East for DePaul, but nice for them to get a W here. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today here. Like we said, today, very, very limited slate because of the college football championship game. We got two ranked teams play, or 2 power games going on. We got Rutgers and Penn State. We got Villanova and Georgetown are the 2 games there. So I will have some more conversation on Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit about those games. We'll talk about the big slate on Tuesday. Get going for the rest of the week as we get closer and closer to the best part of the season when March starts rolling around. We're just less than 2 months away from Selection Sunday. Cannot wait for all of that coming up. Folks, we want to say, as always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until Tuesday, peace out.